Hello. Did you know that in biblical thinking, name equals authority, but name also equals fame? So, by obscuring the name of the Creator, Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's authority, and Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's fame. Let me show you. Jews have replaced the name of the Creator with Adonai, and even Hashem, while Christians have replaced the Creator's name with Lord. And how about Pan, Zoti, Her, Uram, Shoda Prabhu in other languages? Can you see the confusion? Do you see the interference? Therefore, in this video series, we will focus on the original Hebrew name of the Creator, Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. Numerous topics and arguments will be investigated and tested against authentic Hebrew manuscript evidence. Thanks to Justin, my son, who prepared these topics and who will also be presenting these topics. My name is Piet van Rensburg. Please visit us at HebrewGospels.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series on Nehemiah Gordon and the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. This is session number 4. Would scribes change a composite Shewa into a simple Shewa for Ketiv Qere perpetuum? What do I mean with this question, and why is it important? So on the screen we have two Hebrew words. The word at the top is Adonai, and underneath it is the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. The first vowel on the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh, that vowel sign is 2 dots, and that is called a Shewa or a simple Shewa. Whereas the first vowel sign on Adonai is the 2 dots, the Shewa, plus another vowel next to it, the 2 vowel signs together, forming a composite or a compound Shewa. The question is, if the scribes wrote the vowels of Adonai on the name, would they actually change that composite Shewa on Adonai into a simple Shewa when they wrote it on the name? And this is an important question, because if the answer is yes, the scribes would make this change and did make this change, then the vowels on the name are the vowels of Adonai. However, if the answer is no, the scribes would not make this change and did not make this change, then the vowels on the name are not the vowels of Adonai, and then the name is probably Yehovah. So it's an important question. Now, before we get into this, I just want to do a quick review on the previous session, session number 3. So we discussed last time the difference between the consonants and the vowels in the Hebrew Bible. So on the screen, the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh, the consonants are written in black and the vowels in blue, just so you can see the difference. All the consonants of the Hebrew Old Testament, the Tanakh, were written down BCE. So on a timeline, they were written down BCE, all the consonants of the Hebrew Bible. However, the vowel points were only added to the Hebrew Bible in the Middle Ages. And these vowel points record the traditional pronunciation of the Hebrew Bible, even when that contradicts the consonantal text. And that is where Ketiv Qere comes from. And we discussed last time that the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh was read or pronounced as Adonai centuries before the vowel points were added to the Hebrew Bible. Then the vowel points capture the traditional pronunciation, and we looked at the vowel pointings on the name and saw that they are 100% grammatically correct for Adonai. However, Nehemiah Gordon says no, the Hebrew vowels on the name are clearly, provably, definitively not the vowels of Adonai. We want to talk more about this today. And we'll start with a video clip of Nehemiah Gordon.
The argument is, they say, yeah, Nehemiah, you found this in 52 manuscripts, wonderful. But don't you know, you're so silly, those aren't the vowels of Yehovah, of the name. They're the vowels of Adonai. And that thing that you say is an the shva, it really is the of Adonai, and there's some rule of guttural letters of why it's not written that way. And if that makes no sense to you, you're following, because like that's complete gibberish. I'm quoting what they're saying, and it's utter gibberish.
So let me just explain to you the and the that Nehemiah is talking about. On the name, the first vowel sign is a simple shwa. In modern Hebrew, that's an whereas the first vowel on Adonai is a composite shwa, an Nehemiah Gordon says to say that this simple shwa on the name really represents the composite shwa on Adonai is utter gibberish. And he knows about the argument of the guttural letters, the rule of the guttural letters. So we talked about this last time. So look at the second line. The Hebrew word yatom means orphan, and the first vowel there is a kametz. And when you make this word longer, let's say we make this into a plural noun, yetomim, orphans, as they're on the right hand side. Now the emphasis moves to the new syllable, the im. And this is not yatomim, but yetomim. So the original kametz becomes shorter, and because it is written underneath a yod, which is a non-guttural, it becomes a simple shwa. However, when we look at the next line, Adon means Lord or Master, and from there we form the word Adonai, my lords. Now again, that original kametz moves further back from the accented vowel, and as a third position back from the accent vowel, the accent is on the I of Adonai, and so this original kametz becomes shorter. However, because it is written underneath an aleph, which is a guttural, it becomes a composite shwa. And the same with aton becoming atonot. The first vowel is a composite shwa because it's written underneath a guttural. So that's one of the rules of the guttural letters. When it takes a short vowel, a really short vowel, it's a composite shwa, not a simple shwa. Now people might look at this and say, but this doesn't prove anything. These words are not Ketiv Qere words, these are just normal Hebrew words. These are not dummy vowels that's being written on the name. So what does this prove? And this is basically Nehemiah's argument. He says, genuine Qere Ketiv has the exact vowels in the body of the text, even when the vowels are impossible. From his article, Cutting Through the Confusion, and he applies this specifically to the argument about the composite shwa and the simple shwa. So Nehemiah concludes that because in many Bible manuscripts like the Aleppo Codex, the first vowel on Adonai looks slightly different than the first vowel on the name, it's not genuine Qere Ketiv. He actually says that it is utter gibberish to say that this is Qere Ketiv, and that this simple shwa represents the composite shwa of Adonai. Now remember, for any claim to qualify as a theory, it must be falsifiable. In other words, it must be testable. You must be able to test this. So we want to test this today to see whether Nehemiah's claim is true or not. Alright, so let me explain to you how we are going to test this. It is the claim of most Hebrew scholars across the world that the reading tradition Adonai, the vowels of that reading tradition, was written on the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. So at the top in the green box is the reading tradition. At the bottom in the red box is the Ketiv, the consonantal text in the Hebrew Bible, plus the traditional vowel points. Now, to test whether the scribes would actually change that composite shwa into a simple shwa or not, we need to look for a different Ketiv Qere, and preferably a Ketiv Qere perpetuum, which also begins with a guttural and a composite shwa. So there the Aleph on Adonai is a guttural and it takes a composite shua. Now we need to look for a different Ketiv Qere that begins with a guttural and a composite shua, which is then written on a non-guttural. So they write the vowels of the reading tradition into the main biblical text onto a non-guttural. And then we will be able to see whether the scribes change that composite shua into a simple shua or not. So we will be able to see in the Bible manuscripts whether Nehemiah is correct or not. So we saw this photo in the previous session. This is a photo from the Great Isaiah Scroll, written down many centuries before the vowel points were added to the Hebrew Bible. And in the black rectangle we have the majority text reading Adonai Yodeh Waw Hey. Remember I told you Adonai Yodeh Waw Hey is a title of respect. It's like saying Lord Yodeh Waw Hey or Master Yodeh Waw Hey. Now when we read this as Adonai and then again read the name as Adonai, it's no longer a title of respect. When in Hebrew you repeat a name or a title twice, like saying Adonai, Adonai, that would be an urgent call for attention, not a title of respect. Therefore, by tradition, when the name is written next to Adonai, it is pronounced as Elohim. So again, we have a title of respect, Lord God or Master God. And that is how they got around this problem. Because usually they pronounce the name as Adonai. They can't repeat it twice. So when it's written next to Adonai, they pronounce it as Elohim. So what we saw in the Great Isaiah Scroll is that the scribe correctly wrote down Adonai, but next to it he wrote, instead of the name, he wrote Elohim. Now that's an interesting mistake, and we discussed last time that this mistake is only possible if they already pronounced the name as Elohim back then. So there is a very ancient tradition to pronounce the name as Elohim when it is written next to Adonai. So what happened is the scribes later recorded this reading tradition for us using Ketiv Qere dummy vowel points. And because this title of respect, Adonai Yodeh Waw Hey, occurs more than 300 times in the Hebrew Bible, it is also Ketiv Qere perpetuum. Okay, now let's look at the vowels of Elohim and see whether there is perhaps a composite shua so that we can test this argument of Nehemiah Gordon to see whether it is true. So here is the Aleppo Codex. This was written down at least 1,000 years after the Great Isaiah Scroll, and by this time the scribes had recorded the vowel tradition using vowel points. So this is Jeremiah 2:11. Ha'imir goy Elohim, Wehema lo Elohim. Did a nation change gods, and there are no gods? So the Hebrew word Elohim could both mean false gods, or it could refer to the only true God. And at the end of the day, only context determines definitively what this means. But for now, we are interested in the vowel points on Elohim. So as you can see, the first consonant of Elohim is an Aleph, which is a guttural. And the first vowel is a very short vowel, and therefore it is a composite shua. A really short vowel written underneath a guttural is a composite shua. And in the next line again, we have the word Elohim, and the first vowel is a composite shua. So this is going to be a very good test, because we know that in more than 300 places in the Hebrew Bible, the name Yodeh Waw Hey was pronounced as Elohim. And now we can go and look at the vowel points on the name when it was pronounced as Elohim to see whether the scribes changed that vowel or not. So this is what we're going to do. To test this claim, to see whether the scribes would change that composite shua of Adonai into a simple shua when they wrote it on the name or not, we are going to look at the Ketiv Qere perpetuum, where Elohim is the Kari, what is read by tradition, instead of the name Yodeh Waw Hey. And then we're going to look at the vowels on the name And if we see that the scribes never ever change that composite shua, and they always put in a composite shua underneath the yod of Yodei Waw Hei when it is read as Elohim, then we will know that Nehemiah Gordon is right about this composite shua. If, however, we find that the scribes changed that composite shua of Elohim into a simple shua when they wrote it on the name, then we will know that they also did this with the vowels of Adonai. And this is going to be a very accurate test. It is the most accurate test that we can do, because on the right hand side the reading tradition Adonai begins with an Aleph, which is a guttural. On the left hand side the reading tradition Elohim begins with an Aleph, which is a guttural. On the right hand side the first vowel of the reading tradition is a composite shua. On the left hand side the first vowel sign of the reading tradition is a composite shua. On the right hand side this is Ketiv Qere perpetuum. In other words, they're always reading the name as Adonai thousands of times. On the left hand side it is Ketiv Qere perpetuum. In other words, always when we have this title of respect, Adonai Yodei Waw Hei, the name is read as Elohim. So we cannot ask for a better test. And what we're going to do is look at the vowels on the name when it is pronounced as Elohim. Did the scribes always keep it a composite shua? Or did they change it into a simple shua? So are you ready to go and look at some of the most accurate Masoretic manuscripts in the world to see what the scribes did, to see whether they changed the composite shua or kept it the same? Let's start with the Aleppo Codex. Isaiah 49 verse 22. Ko Amar Adonai Yodei Waw Hei. Thus says the Lord Yodei Waw Hei. Now remember, because Yodei Waw Hei is here written next to Adonai, it is pronounced by tradition as Elohim. And when the scribes wrote down the vowel points, they recorded the traditional pronunciation and wrote in here the vowel points of Elohim. However, we can see here that the most respected Masoretic scribe in the world, Aharon ben Asher, when he wrote in the vowel points of Elohim on the name, he changed that composite shua on Elohim into a simple shua when he wrote it on the name Yod Hei Waw Hei. Why did he make this change? Because he knew that a Yod, the first consonant of the name Yod Hei Waw Hei, is not a guttural. Therefore it doesn't need a composite shua. The only reason Elohim has a composite shua is because the first consonant is an Aleph. So this scribe knew the rule of the guttural letter, and he even applied this in Ketiv Qere. He changed that composite shua of Elohim into a simple shua when he wrote it on the name. Does Nehemiah know this? Does he know that the scribes changed this vowel? Jeremiah 1 verse 6. Omar ahah Adonai Yodei Waw Hei. Then I said, oh, or alas, Lord Yodei Waw Hei. Because Yodei Waw Hei is written next to Adonai, it takes the vowel points of Elohim. However, Aaron ben Asher, who pointed the Aleppo Codex, knew the rule of the guttural letter, and he changed the composite shua of Elohim into a simple shua when he wrote it on the name. So is this utter gibberish, or is this a fact? This is quite factual. We can see this in the most accurate Bible manuscripts in the world. Now let's go back and we contrast the actual factual manuscript evidence with what Nehemiah Gordon teaches.
The argument is, they say, yeah, Nehemiah, you found this in 52 manuscripts. Wonderful. But don't you know, you're so silly. Those aren't the vowels of Yehovah, of the name. They're the vowels of Adonai. And that thing that you say is an the shva, it really is the of Adonai, and there's some rule of guttural letters of why it's not written that way. And if that makes no sense to you, you're following, because like that's complete gibberish. I'm quoting what they're saying, and it's utter gibberish.
So Nehemiah ridicules this argument and this rule of the guttural letters. And he says it's utter gibberish to say that the scribes would have made this change. changing the composite Shewa of Adonai into a simple Shewa when they wrote it on the name. However, we have just seen, and let's look at some more examples, Jeremiah 7:20, where the name has the vowel points of Elohim, and we can see how that the scribe changed the composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa when he wrote this on the name. Why? Because of the rule of the guttural letter, which Nehemiah ridicules. So is this utter gibberish, or is this actually a fact? Ezekiel 2 verse 5 has the name written next to Adonai, therefore takes the vowel points of Elohim. However, the scribe changed the composite Shewa on Elohim into a simple Shewa when he wrote this on the name. It is a grammatically correct difference because of the rule of the guttural letter. So, think critically. Nehemiah Gordon says that it is utter gibberish to say that the composite Shewa of Adonai was changed into a simple Shewa when they wrote it on the name. And he ridicules the people who say that this simple Shewa on the name really represents the composite Shewa on Adonai. However, we've just seen that it is a fact that when the scribes wrote the vowels of Elohim on the name, they did change the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa, and that the simple Shewa on the name really represents the composite Shewa of Elohim. So is this complete gibberish, or is this true? Let's go back to the manuscripts. Look at the factual evidence that we can see in the manuscripts. Ko Amar Adonai Yodewahei, thus says the Lord Yodewahei. Yodewahei is written next to Adonai, therefore it is pronounced as Elohim, and it takes the vowels of Elohim. However, that first vowel there is a simple Shewa. We know that that first vowel, that simple Shewa, really represents the composite Shewa of Elohim. Is it utter gibberish to say that, or is it actually a fact? We know it does, and the same can be said of the vowels of Adonai. Ezekiel 5 verse 5 has the name Yodewahei written next to Adonai. However, that first vowel is a simple Shewa. So we know by tradition that is pronounced as Elohim. These are the vowels of Elohim, but the scribe changed the composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa when he wrote it on the name because of the rule of the guttural letter, which Nehemiah ridicules. So what can Nehemiah say? He can't say much. This is quite factual. We know the scribes did make this change. Let's look at one of Nehemiah's counter-arguments. Nehemiah Gordon posted several photos of Hebrew manuscripts on his Facebook page in which the name Yodewahei has the exact vowels of Adonai written on it, including that composite Shewa. So you can see some examples of this on the screen, where the first vowel on the name is actually the composite Shewa of Adonai. That's quite interesting. Let's read Nehemiah's comment on these manuscripts. He says, there are currently over 700 Hebrew Bible manuscripts in which God's holy name has its own vowels, Yehovah. If the scribes of these 700 manuscripts wanted to insert the vowels of Adonai, nothing was preventing them from doing so, as the scribes of the above four manuscripts did. Don't believe the nonsensical claim that the vowels of Yehovah are the same as the vowels of Adonai. Alright, so because some manuscripts have the composite Shewa underneath the Yod of Yodewahei, and those scribes did not change the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa, Nehemiah says it's a nonsensical claim to say that these vowels on the name are the vowels of Adonai. So here's an example. That first vowel on the name in most Hebrew Bible manuscripts is a simple Shewa. Because Nehemiah found several manuscripts in which that first vowel is a composite Shewa, he says it is a nonsensical claim to say that the vowels simple Shewa, Cholam, Kametz are the vowels of Adonai. Now that sounds good and it sounds definitive, but let's test it. Let's test this claim of Nehemiah Gordon. And how are we going to test this? We're going to look at the vowels of Elohim. So on the left-hand side are 3 photos from the Leningrad Codex in which the scribes slipped up and put in the composite Shewa of Elohim underneath the Yod of Yodewah-Hey. This is obviously when the name is written next to Adonai. So he changed it more than 300 times, but in 3 places he slipped up and did not change it. On the right-hand side, you can see a different manuscript, the Cambridge University Library, ad number 652, and it usually has the composite Shewa of Elohim underneath the Yod of Yodewah-Hey when it's written next to Adonai. Let's apply Nehemiah's argumentation and reasoning to the evidence that we have just seen. In the Aleppo Codex, the first vowel on the name, when it's written next to Adonai, is a simple Shewa. Now, according to Nehemiah's reasoning, it is a nonsensical claim to say that these are the vowels of Elohim, because we've just seen in several manuscripts how the scribes put in the exact composite Shewa of Elohim underneath the Yod. Therefore, it's nonsensical to say that here in the Aleppo Codex, simple Shewa Cholam Chirek are the vowels of Elohim. Is that a good argument? Does this make the name Yehovi? We can see it's written here, Yehovi. No, we see dummy vowels. We see the vowels of Elohim. And what we've just seen is that the most accurate scribe in the world did change the composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa when he wrote it on the name. Some other scribes, like the scribe of the Leningrad Codex, slipped up sometimes and made a mistake, not changing it. Some other scribes were not as precise, and they did not care too much about this rule of the guttural letter versus the non-guttural letters, and they did not change the Shewa. Does this make the name Yehovi? No. Then how can this make the name Yehovah? Let's keep testing this argumentation. Ezekiel 5 verse 8, Yodewah-Hey written next to Adonai, and that first vowel point is a simple Shewa. Is it therefore a nonsensical claim to say that these are the vowels of Elohim? No, we know these are the vowels of Elohim, and the most accurate scribe changed the composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa, because of the rule of the guttural letter. It's not nonsensical, it's factual to say that these are the vowels of Elohim. Nehemiah Gordon says, so the argument that they had to put in different vowels, he's talking about the simple Shewa instead of the composite Shewa, as if this is a Kri Ketiv or a Kri perpetuum, that's utter nonsense. That's complete nonsense. This is not a Kri situation. So first of all, we know this is a Kri situation. The name is usually pronounced as Adonai, not the way it's written. That's called Ketiv Qere perpetuum or Kri perpetuum. It's always read as Adonai. And then, is it utter nonsense to say that the scribes would have changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa? So Nehemiah says here in the Aleppo Codex, to say that the scribes changed that composite Shewa on Adonai into a simple Shewa when they wrote it on the name, that's utter nonsense. That's complete nonsense, Nehemiah says. Let's test Nehemiah's argument to see whether it is true. Now let's look at the Leningrad Codex, the oldest complete Masoretic manuscript of the Old Testament. And this is Jeremiah 1:6. We saw this earlier, but in a different manuscript. So it's Wa'omar ahah Adonai Yodewah-Hey. Then I said, oh, or alas, Lord Yodewah-Hey. And because Yodewah-Hey is written next to Adonai, it takes the vowels of Elohim. In the Leningrad Codex, as in all good Masoretic manuscripts, Elohim's first vowel is a composite Shewa because it is written underneath a guttural. However, when this scribe wrote the vowels of Elohim on the name, he changed that composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa more than 300 times. he only slipped up and didn't change it 3 times. He made this change more than 300 times. So we could look at this and get to 2 different conclusions. We could either say, like Nehemiah, it's written here black and white in the Bible manuscripts of the Word of God that the name is Yehovah. And it's utter nonsense to say that that first Shua represents the composite Shua of Elohim. It's different. Or we could say, we know the scribes changed that composite Shua into a simple Shua because of the rule of the guttural letters. Which one is correct? The second one. We know the scribes made this change. Here's a video clip of Nehemiah Gordon where he talks about the vowel points on the name. Are they the vowels of Adonai or not?
Now, one of the things I was told, and everyone knows, it's a fact, it's common knowledge, which is that the vowels of the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in the Bible are the vowels of Adonai, which means Lord. And I immediately saw, as I was reading these manuscripts, that was simply, it was a fact and it was common knowledge, but it was factually untrue. Like, provably, definitively just untrue. But really, you didn't have to be a proofreader to see that when you looked in the mass manuscripts of the Bible, and particularly at that time I had access to the Leningrad Codex and the Aleppo Codex, you'd be like me saying I have a full set of purple hair. Right? You don't need to be a hairdresser to know that's not true, right?
It's that obvious.
It was that obvious that the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did not have the vowels of Adonai.
Well, it's that obvious that the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh did not have the vowels of Adonai. So here's the Aleppo Codex Nehemiah has just been talking about. Because that first vowel Adonai is a composite Shua, and the first vowel on the name is a simple Shua, Nehemiah says it's so obvious that these are not the vowels of Adonai. If we want to say they are, it's like saying Nehemiah Gordon has a full set of purple hair. Is that a good argument? Is this a good argument? What happens with the vowels of Elohim? This is now the Cairo Codex of the prophets, Ezekiel 32. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh written next to Adonai, therefore it's pronounced as Elohim and it gets the vowel points of Elohim. However, the scribe changed that composite Shua of Elohim into a simple Shua when he wrote it on the name, just like he usually changed the composite Shua of Adonai into a simple Shua when he wrote it on the name. Now let's apply Nehemiah's reasoning here. For us to say that these vowels on the name with that simple Shua is the vowels of Elohim, is that like saying Nehemiah has a full set of purple hair? No, it's a fact. We know the scribes made this change. It's not ridiculous, it's factual. So, does Nehemiah know that the scribes made this change with the vowels of Elohim? Here is a short video clip of Nehemiah Gordon where he tells us just that.
And here's an example of it from a different place in the Aleppo Codex, Joshua 7:7. You can see that Yehovah has the vowels Yehovah. It has the vowels of Elohim. It's not the exact vowels of Elohim, right? The Yud doesn't have the Chataf Segel, but the Cholam is there, and the Chirik tells you, read this as Elohim. You can see that Yehovah has the vowels Yehovah. It has the vowels of Elohim. It's not the exact vowels of Elohim, right? The Yud doesn't have the Chataf Segel.
It's got the vowels of Elohim, but not the exact vowels of Elohim, right? The Yod doesn't have the Chataf Segel. Now, Chataf Segel is just the more specific name for that kind of a composite Shua. It doesn't have a composite Shua, it only has a simple Shua. Nehemiah knows this. Any student of the Hebrew Bible manuscripts will know this if they're simply reading the Bible. You can't miss it. The scribes did make this change. It's a grammatically correct change for the scribes to change a composite Shua into a simple Shua while writing dummy vowels on the name. And even Nehemiah Gordon knows this. So I think perhaps Nehemiah Gordon should start growing his full set of purple hair. Okay? He says, to say that the scribes changed that composite Shua into a simple Shua and that the vowels on the name are the vowels of Adonai is like saying Nehemiah Gordon has a full set of purple hair. And then in a different study he tells us he knows that when the scribes put the vowels of Elohim on the name, they did do this change. So is this a good argument? Or is this a bad argument? Here's another video clip of Nehemiah Gordon where he asks a question. And I think after today's session you will all know the answer to his question.
Now bear in mind, I have no doubt that the scribes in the Middle Ages read Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as Adonai. That was the tradition that even Karaites observed. We have that from Karaite sources. There's no question they did that. The question is if we read it Adonai, why didn't they put in the vowels of Adonai? The question is if we read it Adonai, why didn't they put in the vowels of Adonai?
The question is, if they read it as Adonai, why don't they put in the vowels of Adonai? So first of all, they did put in the vowels of Adonai. And secondly, they changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. Why did they not put in exactly the vowels of Adonai? The rule of the guttural letters. For the same reason, they also changed the composite Shewa of Elohim into a simple Shewa. So Nehemiah says, there's no question they read it as Adonai. The question is, if they read it as Adonai, why don't they put in the vowels of Adonai? So first of all, they did put in the vowels of Adonai. And secondly, they changed that composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. It's a grammatically correct change. And why did they do this? Because of the rule of the guttural letters. So remember the rule of the guttural letters? A yod with a very short vowel takes a simple Shewa and most other consonants. A guttural like an aleph with a short vowel takes a composite Shewa. That's one of the rules of the guttural letters, and that is why the vowels look slightly different when they're written on the name than when they're written on Adonai, the rule of the guttural letter. So let's look at two more examples of the vowels of Elohim. The name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh next to Adonai, Ezekiel 34. Now let's apply Nehemiah's argumentation. The name is written next to Adonai. Therefore we know it's pronounced or read as Elohim. There's no question they read as Elohim. The question is, if they read as Elohim, why don't they put in the vowels of Elohim? That's a dumb question. They did put in the vowels of Elohim and they changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. It's the same for the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh when it's read as Adonai. They did put in the vowels of Adonai and they changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. Ezekiel 34:11. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is written next to Adonai. And let's try Nehemiah's argument once more. There's no question they read this as Elohim. That was the tradition. The question is, if they read as Elohim, why don't they put in the vowels of Elohim? They did put in the vowels of Elohim. And they changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. And when they read as Adonai, they put in the vowels of Adonai and they changed the composite Shewa into a simple Shewa. Why? Because of the rule of the guttural letters. So, to sum up, we have seen today that the scribes of the most accurate Masoretic manuscripts in the world changed a composite Shewa into a simple Shewa while writing dummy vowels on the name. It's a fact. It's factual. We have seen that the vowels of Yehovah are the vowels of Adonai just as much as the vowels of Yehovah are those of Elohim. In both cases, the scribes changed that first vowel sign slightly because of the rule of the guttural letters. That does not make the name Yehovah or Yehovah. These are dummy vowels. The Hebrew vowels on the name are thus 100% exactly grammatically correct for Adonai, just as we concluded in the previous session. However, Nehemiah Gordon teaches the opposite of what we see in the Bible manuscripts. Nehemiah Gordon says, these people who say that they put in a the simple Shewa, and that really represents the the composite Shewa of Adonai, because of the rule of the guttural letter, that's utter gibberish. We've seen it's a fact. They did this with the vowels of Elohim, and they did with the vowels of Adonai. Nehemiah Gordon says, if we say the vowels of the name are the vowels of Adonai, it's like saying he has a full set of purple hair. Alright? We've seen that's not a very good argument. The same could be said for the vowels of Elohim, and this argument doesn't work. Nehemiah says, this argument that they had to put in different vowels as if this is a Kri Ketiv or Kri perpetuum, that's utter nonsense. We've seen today in the Hebrew Bible manuscripts that it's a fact that they put in different vowels. In Ketiv Qere perpetuum, when the name was read as Elohim, and when it was read as Adonai. So for Nehemiah to teach this, is it ignorance or is it dishonesty? Is this ignorance or dishonesty? And can we base how we pronounce the name on ignorance and dishonesty? Or should we base that on facts? The facts tell us that the Hebrew names Yehovah and Yehovah are mixing up consonants and vowels that do not belong together. That is what the facts tell us. And therefore the names Yehovah and Yehovah are not genuine Hebrew names. They are mixing up vowels and consonants that do not belong together. In the next session, we want to talk about the cholam on the name. Nehemiah Gordon says that the scribes purposefully left out that middle vowel of the name to hide the pronunciation of the name from us. And that if they only wrote the vowels of Adonai on the name, they would not have left out that cholam vowel. They took that away to hide the correct pronunciation from us. That sounds very good. And many people get excited about this, and how Nehemiah discovered the cholam. But in the next session, we want to look at the manuscript evidence and ask the question, why would the scribes often leave out the cholam vowel on Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh's name? Why? Until next time, Shalom and Yeshua Mashiach.